Hola, hello, bienvenido, and welcome to the Clearbirth podcast. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Today I'm going to tell the story of how I became a doula. It's the one question that I get asked at every interview, and I'd like to share it with you. The story of how I became a doula starts when I was very young. I was born in New York, but I was raised in Panama for the first 5 years of my life. And then I went down every summer until I was 10 years old. My older sister, when I was about 10 years old, had this book called Our Bodies, Ourselves. It talks about everything that happens to a woman from birth until menopause. And I was fascinated with this book. And when I got to the section about birth and that our bodies, we make babies, I was so ecstatic. And I remember asking my mother questions like, an egg, I don't quite understand, like eggs, like in the refrigerator eggs. And she would be like, stop asking me these questions. Like, she did not want to talk to me about anything below the neck. So I was just very curious and fascinated. And I was in love with the idea of that our bodies make babies, and I loved babies. And I was just enthralled. And I was thinking, well, I think the kind of work that I'd like to do has to involve working with babies in some capacity. I remember thinking, oh, OBGYNs, they deliver babies. So that's what I'm going to have to do, is be an OBGYN. And I remember my freshman year, I was taking a math class, and it was like learning a new language. I had never learned math this way. So it was completely jarring. And as I mentioned, my sisters were 10 and 6 years older than me, so way far removed from school, and they couldn't help me with it. My sophomore year came, and my math teacher was just like, what do you want to be? And I said, I want to be an OBGYN. And she said, you'll never be an OBGYN. You're terrible at math. And so that just crushed my OBGYN dreams. And I remember thinking, well, I have to figure out something else that I need to be. So I graduate high school and then go to college, and I have to start working my way through college. And I decided that, I wasn't too sure if I wanted to be an English teacher, because that was the only thing that I saw that you could be with an English major. And I just couldn't figure out what to do. And my best friend at the time had said, she had had two children by then, and she had said, you would make a great doula. And I was like, well, what is that? And she was like, you go and you help women when they give birth. I remember telling her that that's an awful idea. I would not be a good doula. And later on that week, I was in my OB's office, and I'm flipping through a magazine, and there's an article on doulas, and I'm big on signs. So I was just like, this is the second time I'm hearing about this in 1 week. I need to look into this. And I remember the organization was DONA, Doulas of North America. And I went home and I called the number, and it was like that same weekend they had a weekend intensive, and I signed up. I remember that we had a list of books we had to read about birth, and I was just started reading everything I possibly could. And the first day of my training, it was in Brooklyn. I lived in Manhattan at the time, so it took me an hour to get to this training. And my trainer was Deborah Pascali Bonaro, and she started speaking about birth in a way that I had never heard anyone speak about birth. Like, I was hooked. And I remember I started my doula practice after the training with three other doulas. We decided we were trying to get free births. And we spoke with these expectant parents, and my clients hired me. And I was so excited to get these free births, because you needed to get 3 free births for your certification. My first birth came. I remember it was at St. Luke's Roosevelt in the birthing center. My client was going to give birth with the midwives at the time. And I remember walking through the door and thinking, this is not going to be like the baby story. It's not going to be a half an hour. And 28 and a half hours later, my client delivered her baby girl. And I had never been more exhausted in my life and more excited. And I went home and I slept for 12 hours. And I remember waking up after that birth and going, I can't wait to do that again. And that was the beginning of my career. And the one thing that everybody would say after when we would go postpartum and have a conversation about how their birth experience was, they didn't see the traumatic things that happened to them. And all of the women said the same thing. I was so grateful that you were there. And that made a world of difference. So I was a doula for 4 years before I gave birth to my son. And of course, I had a doula. And when I gave birth to my son, I just remember feeling at one point afterwards was that was the hardest thing that I ever did, but it was the most rewarding experience and feeling after he was born. And I also remember thinking how important it was for me to have my doula there. Even though I imagined my birth to be one way, I imagined that I would need a lot of physical support. And it was just her presence that I needed throughout the labor. And I also remember thinking, I was surprised that people had hired me without having experienced labor before. But then that just spoke to the true meaning of having a doula. It's really about supporting women through that process. And that's what I bring to my births when I go, is just full on support. It does not matter the type of labor that you have, whether you have a labor that's an hour or you have a labor that's 72 hours long. It's supporting women in their choices. And I have now attended over 1,000 plus births, and every birth I attend, it's like the first time. They're like snowflakes. No two births are the same. And that's how I became a doula.